The sky over the village was heavy with gray clouds, and the wind carried a bitter chill that cut through the narrow streets. Alara walked slowly, her white hair shimmering in the weak light, her pale skin almost glowing against the dark stone walls. She kept her head down, avoiding the curious and cruel stares that followed her like shadows. She had always known she was different. Her parents had made sure she knew it every day. Alara's eyes, a soft silver like moonlight on ice, darted nervously around the marketplace. Merchants shouted their wares, children ran in laughter, and dogs barked at anything that moved. But she felt nothing of their cheer. Her heart was heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. Her parents, tired of what they called her burden, had made a decision. She had overheard their whispers the night before, whispers that had made her stomach twist and her chest ache. "They cannot stay," her father had said, his voice cold. "She is different. The villagers will never accept her." "And the traders?" her mother asked, her hands wringing the edges of her shawl. "They will take her," her father said. "Better someone else owns her than we continue to carry her curse." Alara had fled to the woods at first light, thinking she might hide. But the men had found her and dragged her back. Now, here she was, standing in the shadowed market, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. The fear was gnawing at her, but beneath it was a spark she refused to extinguish, a quiet, stubborn pride that said she would not bow completely. The traders approached, their boots clattering against the cobblestones. They were men and women dressed in dark, worn clothes, their eyes sharp, their smiles thin and false. One of them, a tall man with a hooked nose, examined Alara with a calculating glance. "Perfect," he muttered under his breath. "Different, fragile, rare." The crowd gathered, murmuring with curiosity and some with disgust. They had never seen someone so pale, so unlike the rest of the villagers. Mothers pulled their children close. Men looked away, embarrassed by the oddity of her appearance. Ilara's lips pressed into a thin line. She refused to cry, though the cold lump in her throat begged her to. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting the eyes of the traders. If they expected fear, they would be disappointed. The bidding began. Voices rising over the marketplace, shouting numbers and promises. Alara felt each one like a blade across her heart, the coldness of her parents' betrayal finally sinking in. But then, above the noise, a new voice rose. A calm, strong voice that cut through the chaos like a sword through silk. "I will take her," said the man, and the crowd fell silent. He was unlike anyone Alara had ever seen. His hair was white, like freshly fallen snow, and his eyes were pale blue, sharp and commanding. He wore a long, fur-lined cloak, and though he said nothing more, his presence filled the marketplace. Traders and villagers alike felt the weight of his gaze, as if the air itself had grown heavier. "This one?" one of the traders asked, surprised. "Yes," the man said simply. "I want her." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some laughed nervously. "The White Alpha King?" they whispered. "He chooses her?" Alara's heart raced. The stories she had heard of this king, the ruler of the frozen northern lands, feared and admired in equal measure, had always seemed like fairy tales. Now, he was standing before her, his eyes fixed on her as though he could see straight into her soul. The traders hesitated, but the king's presence brooked no argument. They handed her over, muttering among themselves about luck and profit lost. Alara's parents looked stricken, but she did not meet their eyes. Shame and anger warred inside her, but she pushed them aside. She had no time for them now. She had to survive. The king's hand was cold and firm as he guided her away from the market. His cloak brushed against her arms, warm despite the chill in the air. She walked silently beside him, too stunned to speak. Around them, the marketplace slowly returned to life, the crowd dispersing as if the spell of his presence had never existed. The journey north began immediately. They traveled through dense forests, over snow-dusted hills, and across frozen rivers. The farther they went, the more Alara noticed the subtle power in him. His eyes missed nothing: the rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch, the distant howl of wolves. Yet, Despite his reputation as a merciless ruler, he never raised a hand against her. He gave orders to his guards with calm authority, always watching her carefully, silently testing her. At night, as they made camp under the pale light of a crescent moon, Alara sat quietly, staring at the fire. The warmth touched her skin, but not her heart. She did not know this man. She did not trust him. And yet, there was something about him that made the air feel different, alive, as if he carried secrets older than the mountains and colder than the winter wind. He approached without a word, his shadow stretching long over the firelight. He knelt slightly, not touching her, just close enough that she felt his presence, as if it were a physical weight. "You do not speak," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I have little to say," she replied. Her voice was soft, but steady. "Fear does not suit you," he said. Alara looked at him, startled. "You don't know what I feel." "Perhaps," he admitted. "But I see what you do. You do not bow completely. You are different." "Yes, but not broken." The words struck her like lightning. No one had ever said that before. Not her parents, not the villagers, not anyone. She wanted to believe him, and yet a part of her trembled. Could she trust someone who could decide her fate with a single word? The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a strange, almost musical sound. Alara shivered. It was as if the forest itself had noticed her journey, and something ancient and unseen was watching, waiting. She felt a strange connection to the night, the snow, and the shadowed woods, a feeling that something had changed, though she could not yet name it. When the king finally spoke again, his words were careful, deliberate. "By dawn, you will see the castle," he said. "By dawn, your life will change. I do not know if you will be pleased or afraid, but the choice is no longer yours to make." Alara swallowed hard. The fear in her chest did not leave her, but neither did the spark of courage that had never been extinguished. She had survived betrayal, she had survived fear, and now she would survive whatever lay ahead. The night stretched on, long and silent, except for the occasional crack of firewood and the soft whisper of wind through the trees. Alara lay awake, staring at the stars, peeking through the clouds. She thought of her parents, of the market, of the life she had known. It was gone. In its place was a new path, uncertain and dangerous, and yet, it was hers to walk. And somewhere in the shadows of the forest, something watched. Something old and powerful. Its gaze fixed on Alara. It did not move. It did not speak. It waited, patient and knowing, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, pale and silver, and the king stood, silent and commanding, waiting for her to rise. Alara stood too, brushing snow and dirt from her cloak, her heart hammering with fear, hope, and a strange, unnameable longing. She did not know what awaited her at the castle. She did not know what the king truly wanted, or why he had chosen her among all the others. But she knew this. Her life had changed forever, and deep in the shadowed forest, the ancient whispers grew louder, calling her name, Cliffhanger. As the first rays of sun touched the frost-covered trees, Alara caught a glimpse of something moving. A figure cloaked in darkness, with eyes that glowed faintly red. She froze, realizing that the dangers she thought were behind her had only just begun. The castle rose before Alara like a mountain carved from ice and stone. Its towers pierced the pale winter sky, frosted with snow that glittered like scattered diamonds. The walls were smooth and white, yet they radiated an aura of cold authority. She had never seen anything so grand or so intimidating. The king walked beside her in silence. His steps were steady, confident, each movement precise, as if he ruled not only the land, but the air itself. Guards lined the path, their armor catching the faint light, their eyes alert and disciplined. None spoke. None dared break the silence. Alara felt the weight of the stairs, the unspoken judgment. She had been brought here as a prize of curiosity, a rare oddity. Yet already she sensed that this place held its own rules, rules she did not yet understand. She kept her head high, though fear tugged at her chest like a storm waiting to break. Inside the castle, the cold air bit at her skin, sharper than any winter wind she had ever known. The halls were vast and silent, adorned with tapestries depicting battles, kings, and queens long dead. Candles flickered in sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. Each step echoed, a haunting rhythm that made her heart beat faster. The king finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, carrying across the hall. "This is my court," he said. "You will learn its ways, you will learn its dangers, and you will learn your place." Ilara's eyes narrowed. "And what is my place?" she asked softly, her voice barely carrying. Kaelin's pale eyes studied her, sharp as ice. "That is for you to discover. And for me, to test." The word sent a shiver through her. She had been sold, yes, but the king's interest was different from the trader's. It was not cruelty, nor simple fascination. It was a challenge, and she sensed that he expected her to meet it. Days passed in a strange blur. The king's court was a world she did not understand, filled with silent courtiers, loyal warriors, and whispered secrets. They watched her, studied her, and spoke in careful riddles when they dared address her. Each word seemed layered with meaning, each glance a measure of her worth. The king observed everything. He watched her eat, walk, and speak. He tested her without touching her, using subtle questions, unexpected tasks, and situations that forced her to think quickly. And always, he was there, an unyielding presence that made her heart race, even when she was angry at him. Ilara began to see cracks in the armor of the White Alpha King. Moments when his mask of authority faltered, revealing something more human beneath the ice. One evening, she watched him in the courtyard, the wind whipping his cloak around him. His jaw was tense, his eyes distant. Yet when a young apprentice approached with a question, he softened, giving instructions with patience. Ilara felt a strange admiration stirring, though she tried to push it away. It was not only Kaelin who tested her. The court itself was full of subtle threats. Courtiers whispered about her odd skin, about the king's unusual choice, and about the dangers of someone unknown in such a place. Some tried to provoke her, some tried to frighten her. And yet, every challenge she faced made her stronger. She learned quickly, surviving the unseen traps of a court built on power and fear. One night, as snow fell softly outside, Kaelin summoned her to the highest tower of the castle. The room overlooked the frozen sea, white and endless, with mountains rising in the distance. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside, it was calm, an island of quiet, amid the storm. "You have survived longer than most," Kaelin said, stepping closer. His eyes, pale and piercing, held her attention as if pulling her into some unknown depth. "I survive because I must," Ilara replied, her voice steady. "I am not afraid." Kaelin tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Few would say that in my presence." Ilara met his gaze, unflinching. "I am not most people." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Then Kaelin spoke again, softer this time. "You are different. That is why I chose you. But do not think that makes you safe. To be different in this court is both a gift and a threat. One wrong move, and you could lose everything." Ilara swallowed hard. She had always known her difference made her vulnerable. But for the first time, someone had recognized it as strength. The realization was intoxicating and frightening. Over the following days, Kaelin and Ilara's interactions became more frequent and more complex. He tested her wit, her patience, and her courage. He challenged her in ways that unsettled her. Yet she found herself drawn to him, compelled by the mixture of danger and admiration in his gaze. Each conversation was a duel of minds, each silence heavy with unspoken meaning. Ilara began to notice small details about him, the way his hands moved when he was deep in thought, the faint scar along his jaw, the rare moments when his eyes softened, almost tenderly, at the plight of those under his care. The Alpha King was not only a ruler, but a man bound by duty, fear, and an unspoken loneliness that matched her own in many ways. One afternoon, while walking in the castle gardens, she discovered a secluded courtyard filled with frost-covered flowers. The beauty was almost unreal, delicate and fragile, amid the icy landscape. Kaelin appeared without warning, standing at the edge of the garden, watching her. "These flowers survive the cold," he said, his voice quiet, almost thoughtful. "They endure when others wither. You remind me of them." Elara looked at him, startled. "Do you mean that as a compliment or a warning?" "Perhaps both," he replied, stepping closer. "You have fire, despite your appearance. Strength, despite your past. But strength can attract enemies as easily as allies." Number 3. The wind tugged at their cloaks, carrying with it the scent of snow and frost. Elara felt a strange warmth in his presence, a pull she could not explain. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to understand him, but the words caught in her throat. Later that night, Elara sat by the fire in her chambers, thinking of the king's words. She realized that she was no longer just a captive. She had become a player in a world far larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And in that realization was both fear and exhilaration. The castle seemed alive around her. Shadows moved where there should have been none. Whispers of long-dead voices lingered in the corridors. She felt eyes watching her. Unseen and patient, she shivered, remembering the stories she had heard of spirits, curses, and ancient guardians tied to the king's bloodline. Then, without warning, a soft knock came at her door. A messenger, young and nervous, handed her a folded note sealed with the king's insignia. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message was simple, written in Kaelin's careful hand. "Meet me at the tower at midnight. There are things you must know, truths you are not yet ready to understand. But the night will reveal more than the day ever could." Elara's pulse quickened. She folded the note carefully, her mind racing. What truths did he mean? What danger awaited her at midnight? She knew the king's summons were never ordinary, never without purpose. As darkness fell over the castle, the wind howled, and the frost crept across the windows like creeping fingers. Elara wrapped herself in her cloak, her heart a mix of fear, anticipation, and curiosity. She was about to step further into the world she had been, thrust into a world of power, mystery, and the man who had chosen her. Cliffhanger. At midnight, she arrived at the tower. Kaelin stood waiting, pale eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. He extended his hand toward her, and the air seemed to thrum with energy. "The truth begins tonight," he said. Elara hesitated, knowing that stepping forward would change everything. She took his hand, unaware that the moment would mark the start of a bond neither of them could escape. The wind howled around the icy cliffs as Kaelin and Elara rode through the northern forests. Snow fell in soft, swirling patterns, blanketing the ground in white. Each tree was draped in frost, their branches bending under the weight of winter. The world felt silent, frozen in a stillness that made every sound, every crack of ice beneath their horses' hooves echo like a warning. Elara clutched the reins tightly, her pale hair whipping around her face. She had been with the king for weeks now, learning the ways of his court and the dangerous intricacies of the northern kingdom. Yet the further she went, the more she realized that she had barely scratched the surface of the world he inhabited. The castle had been only the beginning. This journey was something entirely different. Kaelin rode beside her, his cloak billowing in the wind, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was silent, but she could feel his attention. It was in the way he adjusted his horse, the way his jaw tightened when shadows shifted unnaturally in the trees. The Alpha King was always alert, always prepared, and she understood now why the people feared him. But it was more than fear, they also respected him. Deeply. "You have learned much in the castle," he said finally, his voice cutting through the wind. "But the world beyond is not as orderly. Here, strength alone is not enough. You must understand what you carry within you." Elara frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned to look at her, his pale blue eyes almost glowing against the snow. "Your blood," he said. "It is not ordinary. It carries power. The same power that has haunted my family for generations. You are tied to a legacy older than my kingdom. A legacy that can save or destroy everything I hold dear." Elara's heart thudded painfully. She had always felt different, had always known that her pale skin and silver hair marked her as unusual. But power? She had never considered such a thing. I do not understand," she admitted, her voice small. "You will," Kalen said firmly. "But first, you must see what my family has endured. The curse that binds us is ancient. It was meant to protect the kingdom, to strengthen the Alpha bloodline. But it can also consume us if we falter. Your arrival was foretold, though not in the way you might think. You are not a victim of fate. You are the key." They rode in silence for several hours, the forest around them thick and dark. The trees seemed to bend closer as if listening, as if the forest itself knew the importance of this journey. Elara could feel a strange energy in the air, one that seemed to respond to her presence. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the strange recognition that something within her was awakening. As night fell, they reached a hidden glade where the ice seemed black under the moonlight, as if the frost had absorbed the darkness of centuries. In the center stood a stone pedestal, carved with intricate runes that glowed faintly silver. Kalen dismounted and gestured for her to do the same. "This is where your legacy begins," he said, his voice low and serious. "These runes mark the power you carry. Touch them, and you will see the truth of your bloodline." Elara hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the cold stone, a surge of light coursed through her. She gasped, staggering back, as visions flashed before her eyes, visions of ancestors she had never known, of battles fought and sacrifices made, of magic that had been feared and revered. She saw herself in the visions, a figure of pale light among shadows, standing against darkness that threatened to engulf everything. She saw Kalen, not as he was now, but as a child, bearing the weight of the curse, fighting against an invisible enemy that sought to consume him. And she understood, in a way she could not explain, that her coming had been meant to balance the scales, to bring hope where there had only been fear. Kalen watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "Do you understand now?" he asked. Elara's voice trembled. I think I do. My blood, it's part of something larger, something powerful." "Yes," he said softly. "And that power can protect my kingdom or destroy it, if it falls into the wrong hands. That is why you must stay close to me. That is why you must trust me, even when it is difficult." Elara nodded slowly, though doubt lingered. She had been sold, betrayed, and thrust into a world of danger. Trust was not something she gave lightly, but something in Kalen's gaze, something unspoken, steadfast, made her want to believe. They spent the night in the glade, huddled against the cold, the fire between them flickering and casting long shadows on the snow. Kalen spoke of the curse, of the sacrifices his ancestors had made, of the loneliness of power, and in those moments, Elara saw not just the king, but the man beneath the burden he carried, the fear he hid, the longing for connection that he rarely allowed himself to feel. The next morning, they were attacked. Shadows moved unnaturally among the trees, figures cloaked in black, their eyes glinting with malice. The Crimson Traders, the very people who had sold her, had found them, and they had brought dark magic with them, seeking to claim Elara's power for themselves. Kalen acted swiftly, his alpha instincts in full force. He commanded the winds, guided the snow, and moved with a precision that seemed almost otherworldly. Elara found herself in the center of the battle, forced to act, to use the power she had just discovered. She focused, willing the energy within her to flow outward, and to her amazement, it obeyed. The attackers were thrown back by an invisible force, their magic dissipating against her light. For a brief moment, she felt exhilaration, a thrill she had never known. She had survived. She had protected them both, and she had touched the edge of the power that lay dormant within her. Kalen's expression was unreadable as he approached her. You are stronger than I imagined, he said. But this is only the beginning. The true test lies ahead. Ilara's chest heaved, exhaustion and adrenaline mixing. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. Kalen's eyes softened. And for the first time, he allowed a trace of warmth to touch his voice. You can. And you will. Because you must. Not just for me, but for yourself. You are not the helpless girl they sold. You are more than that. You are extraordinary. For the first time, Ilara felt a strange sense of belonging. Not to a family that had rejected her, but to this man, this kingdom, and the power she carried. She realized that she was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. She was a player, and her choices mattered. As they prepared to continue their journey north, deeper into the frozen wilderness, Kalen spoke again. There are more dangers ahead. Forces older than you can imagine. Creatures that lurk in shadows. And enemies who will stop at nothing to claim what you carry. You must be ready. Ilara nodded, determination hardening her heart. She had survived betrayal, fear, and now magic she barely understood. She could survive anything if she chose to, but deep within the forest, unseen eyes watched them. The enemy Kalen thought long defeated had returned, drawn by the power that flowed in Ilara's veins. Its hunger was patient, its malice ancient, and it would not rest until it had claimed her. As night fell, the snow glowing silver under the moonlight, Ilara looked at Kalen. He was silent, watching the shadows, his expression tight with focus. She reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. I'm not afraid, she said quietly. Kalen's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the icy distance between them seemed to melt. You will be tested, he said softly. In ways you cannot imagine. And I will stand by you. If you allow it. Ilara nodded, her heart beating fast, a mix of fear, excitement, and something else, something tender, something dangerous, something she could not yet name. She had stepped into a world of shadows and power, and she was beginning to understand that her life would never be the same. Cliffhanger. As they made camp for the night, a chilling howl echoed through the forest. The trees shivered, and the wind seemed to carry voices not entirely human. Ilara's eyes widened as a shadow detached itself from the darkness, a figure cloaked in black, with eyes that glowed faintly red. She realized with a jolt that the danger Kalen had warned her about had finally found them. The frozen forest was alive with shadows, the wind carrying whispers that seemed almost human. Ilara's breath came in shallow gasps, mist curling from her lips as she clutched the reins of her horse. Kalen rode beside her, his white hair a blur against the snow, his eyes sharp and alert. The enemy from the shadows had finally revealed itself, a dark figure cloaked in black. Its presence radiating malice and power that chilled the air. Ilara felt the surge of her own energy, the mystical force that had awakened within her. It pulsed through her like fire beneath ice, responding to the danger around her. The longer she stared at the figure, the more she understood that this was not just an enemy of flesh. It was tied to the curse that had haunted Kalen's family for generations, a manifestation of the darkness that threatened to consume everything he loved. Kalen stopped abruptly, placing himself between the shadow and Ilara. Stay behind me, he commanded, his voice steady, unwavering. Do not try to face it alone. Ilara nodded, though her heart thumped fiercely. She had learned much on this journey, yet fear still lingered. Not for herself, but for the king beside her. She had grown to care for him, in ways that were frightening and new. His presence was a constant anchor, and she knew that losing him would shatter everything. The shadow moved closer, its red eyes gleaming with hunger. Kalen's hand rose, and with a sweep of his arm, the wind and snow whipped around him, forming a protective barrier. Yet even his power seemed to struggle against the enemy's dark magic. Ilara's instincts flared. She focused inward, drawing on the strange energy she now understood belonged to her bloodline. Light radiated from her hands, cold and brilliant, reflecting the pale glow of the moon on the snow. "Use it," Kaelin shouted. "Do not fear your power." Alara took a deep breath, steadying herself. The light expanded outward, forming a shield that met the shadow's darkness with a crackle of energy. The figure hissed, recoiling. But it did not retreat. Instead, it pressed forward, attempting to penetrate the glow with every ounce of its dark magic. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. "You are ready," he said, almost to himself. "This is why you were brought here. This is why I chose you." Alara's heart swelled with both fear and resolve. She realized that the power she had once feared was not a curse, it was a gift. It was the key to saving not just herself, but the man who had become more than a king in her eyes. It had become something personal, something deeply emotional, a bond that neither could deny. The clash of light and shadow lit the forest in a ghostly glow. Trees groaned under the force of the energies unleashed, and snow swirled violently around them. Alara moved instinctively, directing the light with her thoughts, each motion countering the shadow's attacks. Kaelin, beside her, struck with precision, his movements both protective and commanding, guiding her when needed, yet allowing her to stand on her own. Minutes stretched like hours. The battle tested every skill they had learned, every ounce of strength and courage they possessed. And then, with a final, deliberate movement, Alara concentrated all of her energy into a brilliant surge of silver light. The shadow screamed, its form unraveling into mist and darkness that dissipated into the cold night air. The forest fell silent. Only the wind whispered among the trees, carrying away the echoes of the battle. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted, her body trembling from the release of energy. Kaelin knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You did it," he said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "You are extraordinary." Alara looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw the man beneath the Alpha King, the weight of his past, the loneliness of his power, and the depth of his feelings. "We did it," she corrected, her voice quiet but firm. Together, Kaelin's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand, holding it with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the fierce power he wielded moments before. "Yes," he admitted. Together. The realization hit her like a wave. She had been sold, betrayed, and cast aside. Yet here she was, standing beside the man who had chosen her, who trusted her, who saw her not as a burden but as essential, as powerful, as worthy. And in that moment, she knew that their bond was no longer just of necessity, it was something deeper, something that could not be broken by magic, shadow, or fate. They returned to the castle, their journey through the frozen forest quieter now, each lost in thought. The storm of the night had passed, leaving a calm, almost ethereal peace in its wake. Snow continued to fall, but it was gentle, soft, like the world itself had exhaled. Inside the castle, the warmth of the fire welcomed them, and the court watched in silence as the king and his chosen one entered. Kaelin did not announce their victory. He did not boast. Instead, he stood beside Alara, allowing the court to witness her presence, her strength, and her importance. Over the following days, Alara continued to learn about the depth of Kaelin's kingdom, the nuances of his family's curse, and the ways her power could aid the people. She discovered hidden chambers, long-forgotten texts, and magical artifacts that revealed more about her bloodline than she could have imagined. Every discovery brought both wonder and responsibility, and Kaelin remained close, guiding her, challenging her, yet always respecting her autonomy. One evening, as the northern lights danced across the sky, Alara and Kaelin stood atop the castle walls. The cold wind wrapped around them, yet it carried a warmth between them, subtle but undeniable. "You have changed everything," Kaelin said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Not just for me, but for this kingdom. You have brought hope where there was only fear." Alara turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the shimmering sky. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "You showed me the way, but I had to find the strength inside myself." He nodded, his expression solemn but tender. "And now, There is nothing we cannot face. Together. 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 The air was charged, a silent acknowledgement of their bond. Forged in danger, strengthened in trust, and deepened in shared understanding. Alara felt a surge of emotion. A mixture of pride, relief, and something else, something that whispered of love. Tentative yet undeniable. But even in the quiet, the shadows of the past lingered. Alara glanced down at her hand and noticed a faint glow, a mark she had not seen before. Her pulse quickened. It was a symbol, etched into her skin by the magic of her bloodline. A sign that her journey was not yet over. Kalen noticed her gaze. "What is it?" he asked, following her eyes. "It's new," Alara admitted. "Something is awakening, something I don't yet understand." He reached for her hand, holding it over the mark. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." For a moment, the world seemed still. The snow falling silently around them. The northern lights, painting the sky in waves of green and blue. They stood side by side, a pair bound not by obligation, but by choice, by trust, and by the trials they had endured. Alara realized, finally, that she was no longer the girl who had been sold. She was no longer defined by the fear and cruelty of others. She was a force in her own right, powerful and capable, and she had the man she had come to care for, standing beside her. As dawn broke over the frozen kingdom, the first rays of sunlight caught the snow and the ice, casting a glow like liquid silver across the land. Kalen and Alara stood together atop the highest tower, the wind whipping around them, the world stretching endlessly before them, and in the distance, a faint whisper carried on the wind, not threatening, but expectant, hinting at new challenges, new adventures, and a destiny that was still unfolding. Cliffhanger ending. Alara touched the mark on her wrist once more, feeling its warmth and pulse. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. Kalen placed his hand over hers, eyes full of determination. "Then we will face it, whatever comes," he said. And as the sun rose, the kingdom below seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter of the White Alpha King and the girl who had changed his fate forever.